Sometimes a big undertaking, big change comes in gradually. For example, I was reading about this man who got really involved with local fire tower restoration in the Catskills years ago, making it possible for people to go up and see the panoramic view from these towers that only forest rangers used to be able to see. And then while he was working on those other restoration projects, he got hold of all the parts of a disassembled fire tower himself and decided to build it on his property in West Hurley. Small side project, right? Putting up a fire tower on your property in West Hurley. And the thing is, it wasn't like he even had a map or plans for doing this, although he did eventually find plans for a sister tower to the one he was putting up. This guy literally pulled much of the salvage parts for his tower out of mud, painstakingly cleaned, oiled, and painted them, bolt by bolt, section by section, before reassembling the tower in a form that's now fully functional in its new location. I wonder at what point this guy realized, I'm going to build my own fire tower. Crazy undertaking, and the idea for it seemed to slowly sneak up on him while he was doing other things. The actress Ellen DeGeneres tells the story of how, as a young person, she was in a real rough patch of life, broke, struggling in just about every way. And one day, coming back to her rundown apartment, just after finding out that her girlfriend had been tragically killed in a car accident, she lay on the mattress wondering what she was going to do with her life. And suddenly, she had a vision of her first ever comic sketch, a conversation with God by telephone, in which the audience could only hear her side. Part of this vision was the idea that she was going to share that sketch on the then very famous late-night show, Johnny Carson. This vision came to Ellen when she had never done stand-up comedy or acting ever before in her life. Eventually, many of us might know she became a mega-famous comedian, and along the way, pretty early in her career, in fact, her exact vision would come true of sharing that sketch that she wrote down in the midst of that tragic moment in her life. Sharing that sketch, incredibly funny. If you've never seen it, go home, Google it, look it up. It's the sketch about talking with God from Johnny Carson with Ellen DeGeneres, and she ended up sharing it on the Johnny Carson show. As Christians, we're uniquely suited to receive the news of big changes, whether they come up on us slowly like that fire tower guy, or quick in an instant like the vision that Ellen received. Through baptism, we've been grafted on to the promises made by God to Abraham and Sarah, promises to watch over them and their descendants that we heard about today in our first lesson from Genesis. Notice Abraham's response. He literally falls on his face laughing. Sometimes, in the face of what God seems to be nudging us to do as people and as church communities, laughter seems like the reasonable response. Plant a new church in New Paltz 70 years ago? Found an ecumenical campus ministry that would still be going 60 years later in a new and energized format, and then plant an ecumenical Sunday school just a year and a half ago? Go out to the Pride Parade amidst lots of people who don't think there's any reason to care about God and church, or who are actively against church because of how human sin acting through the church has hurt them or people they love. Go out to the Pride Parade and be part of Christ's welcome, healing, and justice. Ha, ha, ha. Open up God's house at Redeemer, aka the building, to other people and groups in need of space to support the great things they're doing, not just as renters, but as co-conspirators for enacting good in the world, building relationships that encourage us as a church community to get outside the box and the building and discover where God is already at work in the world and how we might participate. Ha, 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 you get the idea. I tried to add more ha's per each example, but I lost track there along the way. Yes, sometimes when hearing God's invitation to big changes, laughter seems like the reasonable response. Or maybe we, like Peter, when hearing about the radical work of God coming through Jesus, will try to rebuke Jesus, insisting that this not be so. Things should stay the way they are, God. We like things as we know them. It feels safe even if they're not great. All the ways that we know them. Let's face it, this call from God can be an imposition, like the ashes put on our foreheads on Ash Wednesday, the start of this Lenten season we're in. A smudge imposed on our usually carefully cleaned faces to remind us of Christ's wondrously thorough and inconvenient love. Yet when, with God's help, we say yes to the big changes, be they gradual or immediate, it's amazing to see what can happen. Who knew that inviting people into the building would also be leading us out of the building? That helping them would also be helping us to become more fully church in and for the world? Who knew that bringing together our ecumenical Sunday school would lead to a couple more families finding God and Jesus through Redeemer? Or that going out in the Pride Parade to share God's love would bring us face to face with people sharing God's love with us in their stories? Who knew that founding a new church in New Paltz 70 years ago that would be called Redeemer Lutheran Church would ensure that Christ-centered, scripturally informed, progressive ministry could be alive and well to reach people who need to be reached, including all of us, all these years later? This congregation would never have begun if people weren't willing to make big changes to their lives and the trajectory they may or may not have thought they were on at the time. Now, 70 years later, we continue God's celebratory life, new life work, by looking for where and how God is leading us forward in ministry, even as we're rooted and grounded in Christ and the rich history and traditions of which we're a part. You see, as church and as people, we can discover that as we lose our lives for Jesus' sake, we will find them transformed into something more wonderful than we could ever have imagined. Not lives suddenly easier or without challenges. There will be pain and suffering, for Christ indeed calls us to take up the cross and follow, which implies there will be suffering, challenges, and pain. What is that saying? No pain, no gain. But here we're talking about the discovery that God in Christ, who knows and names us, just like Abraham and Sarah, this God is calling us to participate in the big things, the big changes that God is seeking to do as part of reconciling and redeeming the world and everything in it, so that pain and suffering are not without meaning and not without purpose. And I don't know about you, but that sounds like a heck of a lot more fun than sticking my head in the sand like an ostrich, pretending like I don't hear the winds of change that always accompany God's remarkable and loving and grace-filled presence in our lives and the world. So, maybe none of us will painstakingly reassemble a fire tower or become famous comedians. Well, who knows? But I guarantee you that God calls us to participate in big things that may at times involve big changes in our lives and the churches of which we are a part, including this church, all at once or sneaking up on us little by little. And if we're willing to listen up and with God's help say yes, then we may discover some amazingly exciting ways that God is showing up in our midst and in the midst of this world and inviting us along for the party.